Have you ever felt darkness staring back at you? Not the comforting darkness of midnight skies or the gentle shadows in your room, but the kind of darkness that creeps under your skin and whispers secrets into your bones. The kind of darkness that feels alive. Tonight, we're traveling into that very darkness, into a story that has haunted the ruins of Yorkshire for centuries. A family so drenched in blood, madness, and unspeakable evil that their name still rots in the soil they once ruled. This is the macabre history of the Ashford family, a sinister tale of curses, rituals, and darkness carried through generations. But before we unlock this decaying door together, remember, here at Nocturne of Fear, we don't just tell horror stories. We explore the philosophies behind fear, evil, and death. We peel back the skin of nightmares to see the raw truth beneath. So if you're ready to walk these haunted halls with me, subscribe and join our growing legion of those who embrace the shadows rather than run from them. And hit that bell icon because the darkness is wide and we have countless nights to explore. Now, sit back, close your door, silence your phone. Let the world outside fade away, for the only world that matters right now is the world of the Ashfords. Let's begin. The genesis of Ashford darkness. The story of the Ashford family begins long before their name was cursed by whispers and rumors. It begins with a choice rooted in greed, arrogance, and a thirst for immortality that would ultimately damn every generation that followed. In 1610, in the bleak rolling hills of Yorkshire, there lived a young nobleman named Edmund Ashford. He was handsome, strikingly so, with dark hair that curled at his collar and grey eyes that looked like storm clouds ready to burst. But behind those eyes lay something unsettling, a coldness, a distance, as though he saw the world from a place the living could never reach. Edmund was born into a modest, noble family, inheriting nothing but debts and a decaying estate. But he was determined to rise. He spent years charming powerful merchants, gambling fortunes, and striking secret deals in candlelit inns. Whispers say that one stormy night he visited an old woman in the edge of Epping Forest, a woman known to the villagers as the Bone Witch. They say she lived in a house built from twisted branches and animal bones, with charms of hair and teeth hanging from her door. People avoided her path, fearing her gaze could rot your skin or stop your heart. But Edmund, he sought her out willingly. He knelt before her smoky fire and offered his own blood in a silver chalice, asking for two things: wealth that would eclipse all rivals and a lineage that would never die out. The Bone Witch accepted his blood with a thin smile. She spoke ancient words, her cracked lips trembling as she poured wax over his heart and bound his hair into a knot. When she was done, she whispered, "Your wish is granted. But know this, where immortality is sown, corruption will blossom. Your seed will grow strong and dark." Edmund left her hut feeling powerful, almost giddy. Within months, his fortunes turned. He discovered an iron deposit beneath his lands and built mines that soon fed the ironworks of London. His wealth grew so rapidly that by age 30 he was called the Iron Lord of Yorkshire. But with every mine he dug, strange accidents occurred. Entire shafts collapsed, burying dozens alive. Some miners claimed they saw shadows with glowing eyes watching them in the tunnels. But Edmund dismissed them as fool's tales, caring only about the silver and gold pouring into his coffers. Flush with wealth, he decided to build a manor unlike any other. He traveled to the Scottish Highlands to buy obsidian black stone quarried from ancient lands said to be cursed by witch burnings centuries before. The locals begged him not to take the stone, warning that it carried grief and rage soaked into its cold veins. Edmund ignored them. When the stone arrived, workers complained of dizziness and nightmares while handling it. They heard faint screams echoing through the slabs as they carved them into walls. Animals refused to enter the building grounds, and flocks of crows circled the construction site for weeks. But to Edmund, it was beautiful. Ashford Manor rose from the hillside like a monument to his power. Black stone, towering spires, gargoyles with twisted faces, and windows so dark they barely let the sun in. The villagers called it the Mourning Castle for its color, and some said it was built not as a home, but as a prison for something that should never be freed. When the manor was completed, Edmund threw a grand feast. Nobles, merchants, scholars, and priests all attended, but many felt uncomfortable within those walls. The air was heavy, the shadows flickered even without candlelight, and the portraits Edmund commissioned of himself showed a darkness around his eyes that no one had ever seen before. That night, as guests slept in their chambers, the earth beneath the manor rumbled. A maid awoke screaming, claiming she saw a woman's face in her mirror, skinless and weeping blood. Edmund ignored all complaints. To him, these were signs of power, signs that his empire was now touched by forces beyond the human realm. And when he married Eleanor Holloway, a young woman of ethereal beauty with hair like spun moonlight, the villagers wondered if she too had been cursed by proximity to him. Her eyes seemed always distant, her skin pale like candle wax, and her smile was sad, as if she knew her fate long before it arrived. Their wedding night was ravaged by a thunderstorm that tore the tallest spire of the manor in half, sending obsidian shards crashing into the gardens below. Some say it was an omen. Others say it was the land screaming in agony under Edmund's greed. But he merely drank his wine and smiled at the thunder shaking his windows. For Edmund Ashford believed he had conquered not only the land, but fate itself. Yet, in that belief, he sowed the first seeds of the darkness that would curse his bloodline forever. The ghost child. The morning after the storm, the manor was silent. Servants whispered prayers as they swept up shattered obsidian from the gardens. The priest who had blessed Edmund and Eleanor's marriage left before dawn, muttering that the house reeked of old sins and restless spirits. Eleanor was never the same after that night. Her once bright, curious eyes became vacant, as if she saw something in the shadows that no one else could see. She walked the halls with trembling hands, pressing rosary beads to her lips, praying under her breath even while eating or brushing her hair. When Eleanor fell pregnant a year later, Edmund was overjoyed. He believed an heir would cement his legacy forever. But Eleanor's pregnancy was haunted from the beginning. At night, she woke up screaming, claiming something was clawing inside her womb. Servants would find her curled in corners, crying that she could hear whispers calling her child by name. The midwives feared for her mind. They burned sage and placed protective symbols under her pillows, but nothing eased her terror. Finally, the day of birth came. Thunder rolled across the Yorkshire hills, and black clouds pressed low upon the manor's twisted spires. Eleanor screamed through labor, her cries echoing through the halls like tortured violins. The first child, a boy, emerged silent and still. He was pale as wax, with lifeless blue lips. The midwives tried to revive him, but his tiny chest never rose. Eleanor sobbed so violently that she tore the sheets from the bed, clutching the limp infant to her breast, refusing to let him go. But then, to everyone's horror, another cry pierced the storm. The second child, a twin boy, was born, shrieking. His cry was not that of a newborn. It was shrill, almost metallic, echoing through the chamber in unnatural vibrations. When the midwives turned to see him, they recoiled in shock. His skin was ashen pale, almost translucent, with a faint gray hue that never seemed to warm. His hair was sparse and silvery, his limbs thin and delicate. But it was his eyes that struck terror into every soul in that room. They were an icy, milky blue, so pale they appeared almost white, with tiny black pupils like pinpricks in fresh snow. And though newborns cannot focus, this child stared directly at each face around him, unblinking, as if memorizing each soul. Eleanor gazed at her surviving son with empty eyes. She whispered only once, "The ghost child. He has come to finish what you started, Edmund." Within days, Eleanor fell into fever. She screamed for hours each night, shouting about shadows feeding on her son's life force, about dead children standing by her bed. The priest was called to exorcise her chambers, but nothing stopped her descent into madness. On the seventh day, Eleanor was found dead in her bed, her eyes wide open and mouth twisted in a silent scream. The priest who blessed her body fainted upon seeing her face. He later claimed that her pupils were dilated so wide, her eyes were pure black, as if she died seeing something no mortal should ever witness. Edmund buried her in the family crypt beneath the manor, sealing the coffin with iron nails and placing obsidian shards over the lid, as if to trap something within. Their son, named Thomas Ashford, grew under a thick cloud of unease. Servants avoided him, crossing themselves whenever he passed. Animals fled at his approach. Even as a baby, he rarely cried or cooed like other children. He lay silently in his cradle, staring at the ceiling with those ghostly pale eyes, watching shadows dance across cracked plaster. By age 3, Thomas began speaking fluently, but his words unsettled everyone. He would sit in the nursery, speaking softly into empty corners, calling out names of long-dead Ashford ancestors whom no one had ever mentioned in his presence. At age 5, his governess found him in the old wine cellar, kneeling among dead rats. He had lined them up in perfect rows, whispering to each one in turn, stroking the matted fur. When she screamed and pulled him away, he looked up with those unblinking eyes and said in his calm, cold voice, "Don't be afraid. They're only telling me their secrets." He became obsessed with death. By age 7, he dissected dead birds he found in the gardens, peeling back their flesh with surgical precision, studying their bones and organs with an expression of quiet curiosity. At age 10, he demanded access to his father's forbidden library, a towering room of tomes bound in leather and skin, containing knowledge of alchemy, demonology, necromancy, and forbidden philosophies lost to civilized minds. Edmund, proud of his son's intellect, allowed it. Thomas devoured everything he read. He learned the old languages, deciphered occult rituals, memorized alchemical symbols, and began practicing small rites in secret chambers beneath the manor. Servants would hear him chanting in tongues under moonlight, shadows writhing on the stone walls around him, even when no candle burned. By age 16, he claimed he could hear the voices of their ancestors guiding him. He told Edmund, "They speak of the chain power in our blood. They want me to set it free." Edmund, now an older man, with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, began to fear the very air he had so longed for. He no longer saw a sun. He saw something else, something that stared through him into worlds he could never comprehend. The villagers called Thomas the Ghost Child. Children dared each other to run to the manor gates and call out his name, but those who did often returned silent, eyes wide and trembling, refusing to speak of what they saw in the tower window. A pale boy with white eyes standing in the shadows, watching them with a cold smile. Some say he was born cursed. Others believe he was simply the harvest of Edmund's unholy bargains. But one thing was certain. The darkness that began with Edmund's ambition had found its true heir in Thomas Ashford. The ritual of the blood moon. Thomas Ashford's reputation as the ghost child spread far beyond Yorkshire. Stories of his unnerving gaze and strange rituals reached London, where scholars of the occult whispered his name with a mixture of fear and envy. At 17, Thomas became obsessed with the blood moon, the rare lunar eclipse when the moon turns a deep crimson, staining the night sky with the color of fresh blood. He believed it was a time when the veil between life and death thinned, allowing the spirits of ancestors and old gods to reach into the mortal world. In the months leading to the eclipse, Thomas spent every waking hour in the hidden library beneath Ashford Manor, reading forbidden texts bound in cracked human skin. He studied grimoires from forgotten Eastern sects, scrolls stolen from Ottoman tombs, and parchments written by plague doctors who dabbled in necromancy. Servants said he didn't eat or sleep. His skin grew paler than moonlight, his eyes ringed with purple shadows. He wandered the halls barefoot in silence, whispering in tongues under his breath, scratching occult symbols into the stone walls with a bone knife. Finally, on the night of the blood moon, Thomas vanished into the woods behind the manor. The sky was painted in crimson hues, and an eerie stillness fell over the land. No owls hooted, no insects chirped, not even the wind rustled the leaves. Two stable boys, curious and foolish, followed him at a distance. They hid behind a twisted oak and watched as Thomas stood in a clearing, stripped to his waist, his chest painted with symbols in what looked like black tar but smelled like rotting flesh. He raised his arms to the moon, chanting words that made their stomachs twist with nausea, as if their souls recoiled from the sound itself. Then he pulled a writhing black hen from a sack and with a swift motion slit its throat over a stone slab carved with ancient runes. The boys covered their mouths to muffle their screams as Thomas dipped his fingers in the gushing blood and drew an eye over his own closed eyelids, chanting louder. The moon seemed to pulse above him. The boys felt as if something vast and ancient shifted in the shadows beyond the trees, watching them with countless unseen eyes. One boy fainted. The other ran, screaming through the woods, never stopping until he reached the village chapel. When the priest asked what he saw, he could only sob. He was speaking to them, and they were answering back. The next morning, Thomas returned to the manor as if nothing had happened, but something had changed. His movements became unnaturally graceful, his voice deeper and layered with an echo that didn't belong to a human throat. Servants swore they saw shadows flicker and crawl behind him, even in candlelight. Mirrors cracked when he walked past. Animals howled and scratched at doors whenever he entered a room. Edmund confronted him one evening in the study, demanding to know what he had done under the blood moon. Thomas turned his gaze upon his father, those milky blue eyes gleaming with unnatural light, and said in a voice that reverberated like distant thunder, "I spoke to the ones who gave us life. I promised them my devotion. In return, they will awaken the sleeping blood within us." Edmund, trembling with horror, whispered, "What? What have you invited into our family?" Thomas smiled coldly. "Not something, father. Someone. The first Ashford, the true Ashford, the blood that birthed us all, and that will never die." That night, Edmund locked himself in his chambers, refusing food or drink, scribbling prayers on the scraps of parchment until his fingernails split and bled. He died 2 days later, curled in a fetal position on his bed, eyes wide open and mouth frozen in a silent scream. Thomas buried him at dawn, alone. No priest was called. No servants were allowed near the grave. He placed obsidian shards and bones around the burial mound, muttering words that smelled of old graves and rotting flesh. From that day forward, Thomas ruled Ashford Manor with unchallenged power. He dismissed half the servants, sealing them out of entire wings of the house. Strange visitors arrived at midnight, hooded figures carrying leather-bound books and iron cages filled with animals that never returned alive. Villagers who wandered too close to the manor at night claimed they saw torch-lit processions winding through the woods, heard chanting in tongues that made their teeth ache, and smelled burning blood carried on the cold wind. And above it all, in the tallest tower window, the ghost child stood, watching, always watching, with his unblinking white eyes that saw into worlds no sane mind could bear. Dark reflection. Fear is a powerful teacher, but there is a deeper terror hidden within the Ashford rituals, the surrender of one's humanity for knowledge and power. Thomas's story reminds us that evil is not always external. Sometimes it is born from the refusal to accept the limits of mortality and from the desperate desire to reach beyond what we are meant to know. For when we seek to tear down the veil that protects us from the infinite, we do not find godhood. We find madness. The Screaming Wing. As Thomas Ashford's reign over Ashford Manor continued, the family's darkness deepened in ways that even villagers could not imagine. It was during his 40th year that he ordered an entire wing of the manor to be sealed. The west wing, once filled with guest chambers, music halls, and golden chandeliers, was locked with rusted iron chains and barred from floor to ceiling. Servants whispered it was because of what lay beyond those doors. They heard them at night, muffled sobbing, scratching, sometimes piercing screams that echoed down the dark corridors and rattled the ancient window panes. No one dared ask Thomas about the sounds. Those who did disappeared by morning, their beds cold and undisturbed. But behind those chained doors, horrors unfolded that twisted the Ashford bloodline even further. You see, Thomas believed the Ashfords carried a sleeping power in their veins, placed there by the first ancestor who had made a pact with the ancient gods of the underworld. But the power was diluted over generations, weakened by impure unions with those outside their blood. To awaken it, he turned to inbreeding. Thomas forced his own children to marry each other, believing it would concentrate the dark essence. His daughters bore children who were born malformed, some with fused limbs, twisted spines, or eyeless sockets. Others were born silent and still, their skin blackened with bruises from within. But a few, a rare few, survived. These children never spoke. They never cried. Their milky white eyes mirrored Thomas's, unblinking, filled with a cold knowing. They grew slowly, their limbs thin and elongated, their necks unnaturally long, their fingers claw-like and curling inward like dead spiders. Thomas called them his true heirs. To the world, they were abominations. To him, they were the culmination of centuries of darkness. the perfected vessels for the power he worshipped. He kept them locked in the west wing, away from the few remaining servants, away from prying eyes. He built an altar at the end of the wing's grand hallway, carved from black stone and inlaid with silver runes. Each blood moon he led his twisted children to the altar and anointed them with blood drawn from his own veins. He whispered prayers into their ears, words in languages older than any scripture, promising them that soon their souls would merge with the spirits of their ancestors, and they would become gods among men. But the children screamed when he touched them. Their cries were inhuman, raw, broken sounds that scraped against sanity itself. Servants plugged their ears with wax to sleep, but still the screams found their way into dreams. One brave maid, young and full of naive compassion, tried to sneak into the west wing to bring the children food and blankets. She believed no child deserved such horror. That night, she never returned to her quarters. At dawn, her bloodied apron was found hanging from the chained doors, and Thomas dismissed her absence with chilling calm. She has joined them. She will never be cold again. After that, no servant ever spoke of the West Wing. Those who had rooms nearby requested reassignment. Others fled the manor entirely, disappearing into the Yorkshire mists without farewells. Visitors continued to arrive at Ashford Manor. Scholars of the occult, robed figures carrying leather satchels, silent men in black hats and long coats. They spent hours in the locked wing, chanting in guttural languages, the flicker of their lanterns casting monstrous shadows through the boarded windows. Sometimes, after these visits, the children fell silent for days. No screams, no sobbing, only a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to press against the manor walls like an invisible tide. But then the screaming always returned, louder, more desperate, more fragmented, as though their very minds were being torn apart from within. Thomas began to deteriorate physically. His hair fell out in clumps. His skin grew gray and thin like old parchment, and black veins crawled across his chest and neck like the roots of a dying tree. But his eyes remained bright, glowing with an unnatural light, unblinking, always watching the locked wing with devotion. He was often heard muttering to himself as he wandered the halls barefoot. Soon, soon they will awaken, and the world will kneel before the true Ashfords. Dark reflection. This chapter of the Ashford tale reminds us of one of fear's oldest truths, that evil does not always come from external demons. Often it is born from human arrogance, the belief that power and purity are worth any sacrifice. Thomas's horror was not simply in the rituals he performed, but in the philosophy he embraced, that innocence, suffering, and life itself are expendable tools to reach his vision of immortality. History shows us this again and again. From tyrants to cult leaders to corrupted kings, the true darkness is born when humans stop seeing other humans as souls and start seeing them as vessels to be broken, bent, and used. And when that darkness is born, it never dies quietly. The curse of the bloodline. By the time Thomas Ashford reached his 60th year, the manor had fallen into permanent shadow. Its black stone walls wept moisture that smelled of grave soil. Ivy crept like gnarled claws over boarded windows. No laughter, music, or warmth remained within its halls. Only the silence of dread and the muffled sobs from the locked west wing. But Thomas's obsession did not end with his twisted children. He sought to anchor the family's power into eternity, believing that every generation must continue the dark work he began. He married 3 times after his first wife died mysteriously during childbirth. Each wife was younger than the last, each bearing him more children with ghost-pale eyes. None survived beyond adolescence without being claimed by madness, wasting illnesses, or Thomas's own rituals. Servants reported seeing him late at night in the family crypt, digging open coffins with his bare hands, cradling rotting remains, and whispering prayers in the dark. He would return to the manor at dawn, fingers black with grave mold, eyes glowing with a feverish gleam. One dawn, a kitchen boy delivering bread to the crypt found Thomas seated beside an open coffin, rocking back and forth while holding the skeleton of his firstborn daughter to his chest. He was humming an old lullaby, the melody fractured and off-key, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. When the boy gasped in terror, Thomas turned his milky eyes upon him and whispered, "Do you hear them singing? They sing for me. They sing for all of us." The boy fled the manor barefoot, never stopping until he reached York, where he told priests of the horrors within Ashford Manor. But when a small band of monks came to investigate days later, they found the gates locked, the grounds empty, and the crypt sealed with rusted iron. They left, crossing themselves under the grey sky, praying never to return. The decline begins. Despite the terror he inspired, Thomas could not escape the decay of flesh. His health deteriorated into something monstrous. His skin tore at the slightest touch, revealing blackened veins beneath. His teeth fell out one by one, replaced by jagged shards of obsidian he filed and inserted himself, believing they would anchor his soul to the stone gods. His final wife, Marguerite, a French noblewoman known for her beauty and tragic poetry, went mad within months of their marriage. Her haunting songs of grief echoed through the manor until one day she vanished entirely. Some say she drowned herself in the manor's stagnant pond. Others believe Thomas sacrificed her in a ritual to bind a spirit to his unborn heirs. The truth was buried with him. The curse manifested. As Thomas approached his final days, a darkness settled upon the Ashford lands. Crops failed. Livestock birthed deformed calves with extra limbs and eyeless sockets. Villagers fell sick with fevers that twisted their minds into delirium. When a group of villagers stormed the manor to demand answers, Thomas met them at the gates. His hairless skull gleamed in the moonlight, his skin so thin it looked like wax stretched over bone. His eyes glowed white in the darkness. He raised his skeletal hand and spoke in a voice like cracking tombstones. "You are reaping the harvest you demanded. The bloodline will endure. The darkness will feed." With a flick of his wrist, the iron gates slammed shut, nearly severing the hand of a man who tried to flee. The villagers returned to their homes that night, silent and broken, and never spoke of what they saw again. Thomas's final ritual. On the eve of his death, a great storm ravaged Yorkshire. Thunder shook Ashford Manor to its foundations, lightning illuminating the twisted gargoyles glaring down upon the world. Thomas gathered his surviving children, twisted silent figures with elongated limbs and milky eyes, and led them into the family crypt. There, among the coffins of his wives and children, he drew a circle of blood and bone dust. Chanting in tongues no living man should know, he slit his own throat and let his blackened blood flow into the circle. His final words, heard only by his deformed heirs and the spirits watching from the shadows, were, "May the darkness bind us. May the blood awaken. May death fear our name." His children wailed in unison, a chorus of broken souls echoing through the crypt, shaking the stone walls so violently that cracks spread through the manor above. By dawn, Thomas Ashford was dead, but his body never decayed. When servants found him days later, his corpse sat upright against the crypt wall, eyes open, lips twisted into a faint smile, skin pale and unrotted as though carved from stone. They sealed the crypt with iron and obsidian, praying it would hold his evil forever. But evil that is nurtured over centuries never dies so easily. Dark reflection. What do we fear most about cursed bloodlines and haunted families like the Ashfords? It is not merely their rituals or twisted children. It is the reminder that evil is not always an external force. Sometimes it is a seed planted in the hearts of men by their own greed and arrogance. Sometimes darkness is not inherited, but chosen. And once chosen, it clings to blood, bone, and soul across generations. The Ashfords remind us of a timeless truth. When a man seeks power above life, he will sacrifice everything, even his humanity, to grasp it. And once humanity is lost, what remains is no longer man, but something ancient, eternal, and cold, the silent generation. After Thomas Ashford's death, the manor remained sealed for years. Servants fled. Villagers avoided the estate entirely, crossing themselves when they passed its iron gates, whispering prayers for the souls trapped within. But darkness, once planted, grows even without caretakers. In 1753, a distant Ashford cousin named Gregory inherited the estate. He was a scholar from Cambridge, known for his writings on Enlightenment philosophy and rational science. To him, the tales of curses, screaming children, and demonic pacts were superstitious nonsense. He believed only in what he could see and measure. Gregory arrived with wagons of books, scientific instruments, and a wife pregnant with their first child. He declared that the Ashford name would be restored, cleansed of rural ignorance, and transformed into a beacon of intellectual progress. But from the moment he set foot in the manor, cracks formed in his certainty. At night, he heard soft footsteps echoing through the halls, though no servants remained. His wife Eleanor woke him sobbing, claiming she saw pale children peering through the cracked nursery door, their long fingers curling around the frame. He dismissed her visions as hormonal hysteria, but deep inside he felt something gnawing at his sanity. Mirrors warped his reflection, showing a skeletal grin over his own. Cold draughts whispered words in languages he did not know. Candles flickered violently when he read late into the night, as if unseen breaths blew from shadowed corners. Still, he pressed on. He explored the sealed west wing, tearing down iron chains and rotting planks. What he found there haunted him until his death. The rooms of horror. Inside the west wing were 13 rooms, each locked with rusted iron and sealed with symbols painted in dried blood. He smashed the locks open, one by one. In the first room, skeletal remains of children lay in small iron beds, bones twisted unnaturally, teeth sharpened into points. Their empty sockets seemed to stare at him accusingly. In the second room, strange jars lined the shelves, each containing what looked like fetuses suspended in thick black fluid, their tiny mouths frozen in silent screams. The third room held cages. Inside were remnants of what may have once been human, but their bones were so misshapen it was impossible to tell age or sex. The cages were clawed from within, iron bars bent by desperate strength. Each room revealed darker truths. Torture chambers for experiments. Altars stained with generations of blood. walls carved with prayers to ancient gods that predated Christianity, prayers that spoke of eternal life bought through eternal suffering. Gregory stumbled out of the final room, vomiting onto the cold stone floors. His rational mind shattered like brittle glass. For the first time, he understood that the Ashford curse was not mere madness. It was an intentional corruption woven into the very blood of the family. The silent birth weeks. Later, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. She was silent as she emerged, not crying, not gasping for breath. Panic gripped the midwives until the baby finally took a single shallow breath and stared at them with her father's grey eyes. But when Eleanor held her child, she screamed and nearly dropped the infant. For when she looked into her daughter's gaze, she saw not innocence, but emptiness, a void deeper than any grave. Gregory named her Isabel Ashford, desperate to anchor her to normalcy with a simple name. As Isabel grew, she never spoke. She never cried, never laughed. She simply watched. Her milky grey eyes followed every movement, unblinking, unreadable. Birds fell dead from trees when she played in the gardens. Dogs refused to enter her nursery, growling and whimpering if forced. At age 5, she began drawing symbols in charcoal on the nursery walls, symbols Gregory recognized from the sealed rooms. Ancient sigils, runes of sacrifice and binding, glyphs that promised protection through offering blood. When asked where she learned them, she turned her head slowly and pointed to the darkest corner of the room. Eleanor, trembling, asked, "Who taught you, my sweet girl?" Isabel answered in a whisper that froze her mother's blood. "The man with no eyes." That night, Eleanor insisted they flee. But as she packed their bags in frantic silence, Isabel stood by the window, watching lightning flash across the stormy hills. She turned and spoke calmly. "You cannot leave. He won't let you." Eleanor fell to her knees, sobbing, clutching her daughter's thin legs, whispering prayers that turned to broken screams. The death of reason. Gregory, tormented by the truth of the Ashford curse, attempted to burn the manor to the ground. He piled furniture in the grand hall, doused it with oil, and set it alight. But as flames rose, they twisted in unnatural shapes, clawing at the walls but leaving the stone untouched. The fire roared with voices, whispering, screaming, laughing. Gregory ran through the halls, covering his ears, but the voices followed. When dawn came, the fires were out. The furniture was ash. But the manor stood unharmed, cold and silent as before. Gregory died weeks later, locked in his study. His face was twisted in terror, mouth torn open in a scream so wide it dislocated his jaw. On the desk before him was a single sentence, scrawled in his own blood. "He is awake." Isabel's fate. Isabel inherited the manor at age 12. She walked its halls alone, her bare feet silent on cold stone. Servants said she spoke to walls, to shadows, to the empty suits of armor lining the corridors. They heard her humming lullabies in a voice that echoed back at her from the darkness, harmonizing with tones no human could produce. At night, villagers saw her standing at her bedroom window, pale and still, her long hair drifting as though underwater, her unblinking eyes reflecting the moon like dead silver coins. The Ashford curse had found a new vessel, and this time it was patient, silent, waiting. Dark reflection. Silence is often feared in horror, but the true terror lies in what it hides. Isabel's story shows us that evil does not always scream. Sometimes it watches silently from within, hidden behind calm eyes and quiet smiles. And when it finally speaks, its words will echo across generations, carrying curses older than memory itself. The Ashford mirror. Decades passed in silent decay. Isabel Ashford never married, never left the manor, and never aged beyond a certain ghostly beauty that unsettled even the bravest visitor. It was said her hair turned white before she reached 30, yet her face remained unlined, her skin pale and unchanging like polished ivory. But one object defined her reign over the Ashford curse. In the grand master chamber of the manor stood an enormous mirror, taller than a man, framed in twisted black iron that curled like thorn vines around its edges. It was said to be forged in the 1600s by a Venetian glassmaker who went mad creating it, gouging out his own eyes upon completion. The mirror had been passed down each generation, hidden away at times, but always resurfacing. Isabel, however, did not hide it. She placed it at the foot of her bed, so that each morning and night her reflection was the first and last thing she saw. But what she saw was not what others saw. The reflected truth servants who entered her room said Isabel would stand before the mirror for hours, unmoving, whispering softly to her reflection. When asked what she was doing, she replied calmly, "I'm listening." Once a maid gathering laundry glanced into the mirror and screamed so violently she tore her own nails, scraping at the door to escape. When other servants rushed to her, she was incoherent, only repeating, It it was watching me. It smiled at me. It knows my name." The maid was sent away to a convent. She never spoke again for the remainder of her life. The mirror rituals. At midnight, Isabel would kneel naked before the mirror, lighting black candles on either side. She painted symbols on her chest with oils that smelled of rotting flowers and burnt flesh. Then she chanted, her voice deepening into a tone no human vocal cords should produce, the sound vibrating the very glass until it rippled like water. Some nights, her chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural laughter that echoed through the halls, shaking paintings off the walls. Other nights, she would scream, a scream so shrill and raw that even the rats fled the manor's foundations. No servant dared stay after dusk. Only a frail old caretaker remained, deaf and blind, sweeping cold halls and replacing candles without ever seeing the horrors unfolding. The mirror's secret one, storm-ravaged night. Lightning struck the tower above Isabel's chamber, shattering part of the roof. As rain poured into her room, two passing monks seeking shelter stumbled upon the broken doors. They found Isabel kneeling before the mirror, soaked in rain and blood, her hair plastered to her back, her eyes rolled back into her skull. But it was not her that paralyzed them in terror. It was the mirror. In its rippling glass, they saw not her reflection, but a figure looming behind her, tall, gaunt, robed in darkness, with antlers curling from its skull like a horned god of death. Its face was a black void, but within that void burned countless tiny red eyes, blinking in unison like a nest of spiders awakened. The monks fled, abandoning their sandals in the mud as they ran barefoot into the storm, praying to saints they barely remembered, weeping at the horror burned into their minds. They arrived at the village chapel before dawn, trembling and broken, confessing over and over, "Hell has claimed her. Hell has claimed her." Isabel's last words. The next morning, Isabel was found dead before the mirror, her body contorted backwards in an impossible arch, her mouth torn open in a silent scream that split her cheeks to the ears. Her eyes were gone. Not gouged, but simply empty sockets, clean and bloodless. On the mirror's black iron frame, a sentence had been etched in perfect flowing script. "She is mine now." No one could explain how it was carved into the iron overnight. The priest who arrived to bless her body refused to even enter the chamber. He ordered the mirror covered in thick black cloth, its frame bound with iron chains, and instructed it be buried with her body in a specially built stone tomb deep beneath the manor. But the workers tasked with burying it claimed they heard laughter echoing from beneath the cloth as they carried it down. Some said the glass pulsed with a faint red glow, as though embers burned just beyond its surface. The mirror's legacy. Years later, during renovations, builders found the tomb cracked open from within, the mirror missing. Only Isabel's withered corpse remained, curled in a fetal position, facing the corner of her tomb as though trying to hide from something behind her. No one knows where the Ashford mirror went. Some believe it was stolen and sold to occult collectors. Others whisper it walks on its own, appearing in the homes of those who dare seek forbidden truths about life, death, and the gods that crawl beneath creation. But the villagers closest to the manor tell a different tale. On moonless nights, when fog blankets the hills and the world falls silent, some claim to see a tall, dark figure carrying a massive mirror upon its back, its hooves sinking silently into the damp earth as it walks among graves, searching, always searching, for another soul to claim. Dark reflection. A mirror shows us what we believe is real. But what if it shows what is truly there, the darkness we refuse to see? Isabel Ashford's fate teaches us that when we seek forbidden knowledge, we do not remain unchanged. We become part of it. We become vessels of what stares back at us. Remember this: not all reflections are yours. Some belong to something far older, and it wants you to look back. The Black Wedding. Long after Isabel's death, Ashford Manor stood abandoned. Ivy consumed its black stone walls, and rains eroded its twisted gargoyles until their faces were eyeless and featureless. Generations passed. Wars raged across England. Empires rose and fell. Yet the manor remained, silent and watchful, as though waiting for its next chapter. In 1891, a distant Ashford heir named Julian Ashford inherited the manor. He was a tall, elegant man with sunken eyes and a perpetual shadow beneath his cheekbones, giving him a skeletal, almost vampiric look. A poet by trade, he was known in London's occult circles for his writings on death, madness, and forbidden love. Julian was fascinated by his family's cursed history. He sought out old servants, bribed monks for archived confessions, and even visited asylums to speak with survivors who once worked in the manor. Each story only deepened his obsession. He began writing a new epic poem titled The Black Wedding, inspired by visions he claimed came to him in dreams. Night after night, he wrote feverishly by candlelight, his quill scratching until dawn, dark rings deepening beneath his haunted eyes. But what no one knew was that The Black Wedding was not fiction. It was prophecy. The woman in veils, Julian, traveled to Eastern Europe, seeking darker truths hidden beyond the reach of England's fading superstitions. In a crumbling Romanian village, he met a woman known only as Serena. She wore black veils from head to toe, her face never seen by human eyes. Locals called her a Strigoica, a witch who could speak with the dead, curse the living, and seduce men into damnation. Julian fell in love with her at first sight, or perhaps it was not love, but a spell woven into his bones. He brought her back to Ashford Manor as his bride. The villagers watched as a carriage approached, the horse's hooves silent on the dirt road, the air growing cold in her wake. On their wedding day, Julian dressed in black silk and crimson velvet, a crown of obsidian on his brow. Serena wore a gown of deepest midnight blue, woven with threads of silver that shimmered like spider silk under the stormy sky. Her face remained veiled, her hands hidden in black gloves. Only 10 guests attended: occult poets, secret philosophers, and priests excommunicated for heresy. They gathered in the West Wing's grand hall, where generations ago Thomas Ashford's twisted children once screamed in iron beds. The ceremony began at midnight. Candles burned with black flames. The priest chanted rites, not of the church, but of something older, darker, calling upon gods whose names curdled the tongues of mortal men. When it came time to unveil the bride, Julian lifted her veil with trembling hands. What he saw drained every drop of blood from his face, the bride's true face. Behind the veil was not a woman's face. It was a void, a black emptiness with no features, only a depthless dark that pulled at the eyes like a bottomless well. But within that void burned countless tiny red lights, blinking in unison like embers in a dying hearth, or like a nest of spiders awakening in the dark. The guests gasped in horror. Some tried to flee, but found the doors fused shut by invisible force. The priest dropped his book of shadows and fell to his knees, clawing at his own eyes until blood ran down his face. Julian, however, smiled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he whispered, "You have come, my love, my goddess, my death." He kissed the void where Serena's lips should have been. And as their mouths met, a sound erupted through the hall. Not a human scream or roar, but a cosmic shriek that vibrated the stones, splintered glass, and cracked the ancient mirrors along the walls. The guests collapsed, their minds shattered by the sound, blood streaming from ears and eyes. The Black Wedding Ritual. That night, Julian and Serena consummated their wedding upon the old altar in the West Wing. Some say the walls bled where her fingertips touched. Others say shadows writhed across the ceiling, forming shapes that no mortal eye should witness. What is known is this: 9 months later, Julian was found dead in the bridal chamber, his body desiccated as if every drop of life was drained. His face was twisted in a smile of blissful horror, eyes glassy and staring at the veiled figure standing at the foot of the bed. And Serena, she gave birth to a child, or what she called a child, the dark offspring. The midwife who delivered it clawed out her own eyes moments later, dying from shock and blood loss. The only words she screamed were, "It has no face, no face, no face." Servants fled the manor that day, leaving it silent once more. The villagers reported seeing Serena walking the grounds at night, carrying a bundle wrapped in black silk, humming lullabies in a language that sounded like breaking bones and whispering shadows. Then, one stormy dawn, she and the child vanished. Their carriage was seen crossing the hills into the fog, leaving behind only dead grass and an icy stillness that clung to the land for months. Dark reflection. The Black Wedding teaches a chilling truth, that love, when twisted by obsession, becomes worship, and worship of darkness births only death. Julian's story reminds us that horror is not only about fear. Sometimes it is about devotion so blind it consumes the soul. Ask yourself, what do you love so deeply that you would give up your humanity for it? If your answer is nothing, be grateful, because those who love darkness become it. The return of the first Ashford years turned into centuries. The world outside changed. Kingdoms collapsed, machines replaced candlelight, and science replaced old superstitions. But the Ashford curse remained untouched, buried deep within the rotting stone of the manor and the bloodlines of its scattered descendants. In 1973, the manor was purchased by a wealthy industrialist, Victor Ashford Caldwell, a direct descendant of Thomas Ashford through an illegitimate branch. Victor was a tycoon in pharmaceuticals, celebrated for his genius, feared for his ruthlessness. To the world, Victor was a visionary, but to those closest to him, he was a man haunted by violent dreams and endless whispers in the darkness. From childhood, he spoke of a tall figure with antlers who visited his room at night, promising him power beyond kings and gods if only he would return home. When Victor turned 50, he gave into these whispers. He abandoned his companies overnight and relocated to Ashford Manor, spending millions restoring its decaying halls. His goal was not to preserve history, but to complete the ancient work of his ancestors. The awakening ritual. Victor hired only deaf and mute workers to renovate the manor, believing their silence would please the spirits. The west wing was reopened. The old iron chains were replaced with doors reinforced in obsidian and black steel, carved with runes copied from Thomas Ashford's hidden journals. In the grand ballroom, he built an altar from human bone and volcanic glass. Beneath it, in hidden catacombs, he placed offerings, jars of preserved fetuses from his pharmaceutical labs, hearts of condemned prisoners smuggled from Eastern Europe, and canisters of his own genetically modified blood. For months, he performed rituals every night, reading incantations in broken Latin mixed with the dark tongues of his ancestors. He shaved his head, carved symbols into his flesh, and slept on a slab of stone beside the altar, dreaming of the first Ashford, the one who began it all. The first Ashford revealed. According to Victor's translations, the first Ashford was Ealdred Ashford, a medieval warlord who reigned during England's darkest plagues. He was said to be born from a union between a dying noblewoman and an entity known only as the Pale God, a spirit of rot, disease, and decay worshipped by forgotten cults beneath the fens and marshes. Legends claim that Ealdred was born without eyes, but could see beyond mortal sight. As a child, he fed on the dead rats of plague houses. As a man, he slaughtered his enemies and drank their blood mixed with grave dirt to strengthen his connection with the Pale God. He fathered many children, each twisted in flesh and spirit. The strongest survived, spreading his dark seed across England, hidden in noble bloodlines that to this day cannot purge the rot within. Victor believed that by awakening Ealdred's spirit within himself, he would become immortal, not as a man, but as an eternal dark force bound to the earth. The final ritual. On the eve of winter solstice, Victor gathered his offerings around the bone altar. He carved a circle of salt, ash, and powdered human bone around himself and recited the invocation of the Pale God, calling upon the first Ashford to rise from the depths. For hours, nothing happened. The candles flickered, casting claw-like shadows across the ballroom. Then, as midnight struck, the ground trembled beneath him. From the darkness beyond the altar, something began to emerge. First came the stench, the choking oily reek of rotting graves and stagnant water. Then came the form, a towering silhouette, its antlers scraping the ballroom ceiling, its elongated limbs ending in clawed fingers like rusted sickles. Its face was a white void, cracked like old bone, and within those cracks burned countless red lights, blinking in unison. Victor fell to his knees, sobbing with joy. "I have waited my whole life to see you, father of my blood." The entity said nothing. It raised one clawed hand and pointed at Victor. In an instant, his body convulsed violently. His skin tore apart, splitting along carved symbols, revealing raw muscle and black veins crawling with shadow. He screamed, but it was not pain. It was ecstasy. The Ashford curse fulfilled. When the workers entered the ballroom the next morning, they found Victor's body fused to the bone altar. His flesh was hardened like petrified wood, his mouth frozen in a twisted grin. His eye sockets were empty, but from within them flickered tiny red lights, blinking slowly in the dim candlelight. The workers fled, never to return. Since that day, villagers have reported seeing a tall figure with antlers wandering the manor grounds under the full moon. Some claim it carries the desiccated corpse of Victor Caldwell upon its back. Others say it wears his face as a mask. What is known is this: the Ashford line succeeded. Their first ancestor has returned, and with him the curse has been reborn, ready to spread beyond the blackened halls of the manor into a world that no longer believes in such horrors. Dark reflection. What do we fear most? The supernatural, or the truth that humanity itself carries darkness deeper than any demon? The story of Victor Ashford and the first ancestor reminds us that evil is not always an external force clawing at our windows. Sometimes it is woven into our very blood, a hunger that waits patiently through generations until someone foolish enough, desperate enough, devoted enough sets it free. Remember this: there are places in your soul best left unawakened. For once the first darkness rises, it never sleeps again. If you've listened this far into the nocturne of fear, I honor your courage, my friend. Do you dare descend deeper into the darkest corners of forgotten history, philosophy, and the psychology of fear? Subscribe now and join our growing circle of souls who seek not comfort, but truth, however terrifying it may be. Leave a comment below. What is your deepest fear that no one knows about? Because here, your darkness is welcome. This was The Macabre History of the Ashford Family, a Sinister Tale. Until next time, sleep lightly, if you can.